Because of a marriage to ward off bad luck, I, the daughter of a seventh-rank official, was married to the only son of the Prime Minister. 3 months later, my husband passed away, and I fainted in the morning hall. When I woke up, the doctor told me I was 2 months pregnant. The Prime Minister's wife was overjoyed and cried, saying she would treat me like her own daughter from now on. But she didn't know. The child in my belly wasn't her son's. It was her husband's. The Prime Minister, who held power over the empire. Once the most dignified and noble Prime Minister's wife, she was now acting like a madwoman, throwing a tantrum in the morning hall of her only son. "You cursed star! You shameless woman! You knew a nurse's health was poor, yet you clung to him every night. Can't you live without a man?" I knelt on the ground, letting my mother-in-law hit me. Her sharp nails scratched my face, sending stabs of pain through me. The filthy words pouring from her mouth reminded me of those shameful nights. To ensure her son would leave behind some bloodline, my mother-in-law forced me to sleep with him repeatedly. But now, she blamed me for his death. I wanted to say something, but before I could speak, she slapped my face. "How dare you look at me like that?" she shouted angrily. "Someone, sell this whore to the lowest brothel." My face turned pale as I stared at her in disbelief. "Madam." My mother-in-law's personal maid couldn't help but speak up. "She's still the young mistress, and the young master just passed away. Doing this will harm your reputation." Hearing this, my mother-in-law grew even angrier. "What are you waiting for? Who dares defy my orders? Sell all of you off." The maid sighed and said no more. A few rough servants came in, glancing at me with sympathy, but not daring to disobey my mother-in-law. I stumbled to my feet and ran towards the door. Someone entered just as I was leaving. It was my father-in-law, the all-powerful Prime Minister. After a dizzying moment, I passed out. Before I fell unconscious, a strong embrace caught me. When I woke again, I was back in the Songha courtyard. Seeing me awake, my mother-in-law looked delighted, her words filled with concern. "Yunner, you're awake. How's your body? Are you feeling unwell?" I was startled as I remembered what happened before I fainted. I tried to sit up, but she pressed me back down. Her eyes gleamed brightly. "Good Yunner, you're pregnant." I instinctively touched my stomach. "Really? Really?" "Before you woke up, the doctor confirmed it again." "It's been 2 months," she said, crying tears of joy. "A nerve finally has an heir. Now he can rest in peace." She wiped away her tears and looked at me with a guilty expression. "I was wrong just now. I said things out of grief. Don't take it to heart." She gripped my hand tightly. "But don't worry, from now on, you are my own daughter." With that, she repeatedly instructed the maids and servants in Songha courtyard to prioritize me above all else. She kept saying many caring words before finally leaving, glancing back 3 times. In the 3 months since I entered this household, it was the first time I had seen her act so lovingly. Before, she wouldn't even let me call her mother. I had to address her as madam. Now everything had changed because of the child in my belly. If she knew the real father of this child, she'd probably strangle me herself. I truly look forward to the day when she finds out the truth. It was late at night, and the maid keeping watch slept in the outer room. In the quiet night, I could even hear her faint snoring. I waited quietly. After a long while, a warm hand gently brushed my cheek. "Does it hurt?" A man's deep voice whispered in my ear. I didn't reply. He lit a candle and carefully examined the wounds on my face, his eyes flashing with pity. "I'll apply some medicine." Then he skillfully retrieved a jar of ointment from the hidden compartment under my bed. His movements were delicate and gentle. The ointment had a faint fragrance, a special balm from the palace, a small jar worth a fortune. But I had many jars of it. All of them were brought by him, specifically to heal the marks left on my body. "All done. It won't leave a scar, don't worry." After applying the medicine, he lay down beside me, his hand reaching for my stomach. "I didn't expect you to be carrying our child. Last night things were a bit intense. Are you feeling all right?" I didn't answer, trembling as I whispered, "I'm scared." "Don't be. Trust me." He spoke steadily and firmly, his voice reassuring. "I'll protect you, and I'll protect our child." Of course, I trusted him. After all, since I entered the Prime Minister's household, I had been secretly meeting with him, and no one in the vast household noticed anything unusual. I gazed at him with a look of reliance and affection. "I trust you, Xu. Lin Xu, the current Prime Minister." He was also the biological father of my husband, Linen. The first time I met him was the day I entered the household. At that time, Lin had already been bedridden by illness, so there was no wedding reception, no ceremonial rites. I didn't even step out of the sedan chair, but was directly brought to the Songha courtyard. Lin, half propped up in bed, sized me up as though I were an object. He smiled and said, "You're not bad looking." I felt a bit relieved. But in the next moment, he ordered someone to pour a basin of cold water over me. I shivered as the cold water drenched me, my lips turning blue, my whole body trembling, yet I dared not make a sound. "My mother's getting senile. What's all this for? Does she want me to die?" He looked grim. "Strip her of her wedding gown and throw her out." So, on my wedding day, I stood outside the Songha courtyard, drenched and dressed only in my undergarments. It was then that Lin Shuyuan appeared. His eyes were bloodshot, reeking of alcohol, and he stood at a distance, watching me. I didn't know him, but from his clothes and age, I could guess his identity. I stood in a mess, awkwardly saluting him. "Greetings, Prime Minister." He glanced at the closed doors of Songha courtyard, his voice hoarse as he said, "Follow me." Then he took a step forward. His tone was so gentle that, almost by instinct, I followed him. He led me to the study. The servants in the study looked at me in shock, but at his signal, they all left, and one of them closed the door behind them. I looked at him nervously, but before I could speak, he pulled me into his arms. I struggled in despair, but I couldn't resist his strength. Before I passed out, I heard him whispering a name over and over in my ear. Yenner.
5.
I woke up in the middle of the night to find him sitting by the bed, staring at me in a daze. But I knew he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the Yenner he kept mentioning. I must resemble her a lot, right? I curled up in the farthest corner, trembling, unable to take my eyes off him in fear. "Someone tampered with the wine I drank last night," he explained casually. Then he asked, "What's your name?" "The maid from Songha courtyard." "Lu Ruoyun." His expression changed in an instant, realizing who I was, but it quickly returned to normal. He then whispered, "Go back to sleep. Don't worry about anything else." I watched him with a cautious gaze, not daring to move. But eventually, the exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep against the corner of the bed without realizing it. The next morning, I woke up to find my clothes changed. He personally escorted me back to Songha courtyard, and without raising his voice at Linen, one look from him was enough to make Linen behave like a submissive quail. All the servants in Songha courtyard were replaced. I was moved to a side room. The Prime Minister would come in the dead of night, leaving before dawn. This happened every night.
6.
"What are you thinking about?" he interrupted my thoughts. "Xu Yun, if one day people find out about this child..." I caressed my belly reluctantly, gazing at him with tears in my eyes. "Then you blame it on someone else, the young servants, the guards at the gate. Just don't let it fall back on you." I smiled bitterly, unable to speak through the lump in my throat. "Why have you become so sentimental?" He gently wiped the tears from my face. "No one will find out. Even if they do, what of it?" I froze. Looking at the arrogance hidden behind his calm face, I finally understood. Indeed, the emperor was obsessed with cultivating his immortality, and the prime minister firmly controlled the court. He was an influential minister. Who would dare confront him? Internally, my mother-in-law's family had already fallen, and now they were just clinging to the prime minister's house. Why had she gone to such lengths, even drugging me? It was all to preserve her bloodline. Without Linen, and with her own body ruined from childbirth, how could she continue to stay in the prime minister's house? Unfortunately, she didn't know that during those nights, Linen was enjoying the fleeting life with someone else, and it was Lin Shuyuan who shared those moments with me. The people in Songha courtyard were all under Lin Shuyuan's control. None dared leak a word, and they even helped cover it up. I will protect you. He tightened his embrace, speaking solemnly. His expression, though, seemed distracted. All right. I obediently leaned into his arms, pretending not to notice his absent-mindedness. His first wife, when he was poor, worked hard at embroidery to support his studies. Once he passed the imperial exams, he was chosen by the daughter of the Grand Tutor and made her concubine. She became pregnant, but was falsely accused of an affair, and in despair, she threw herself into the water, dying along with her child. Back then, Lin Shuyuan couldn't protect her, but now, he would protect me. At least, all the suffering I endured while imitating that Yenner would not be in vain.
7.
The days spent nurturing the child in the Prime Minister's house were comfortable, but after a while, a bit boring. Could you bring me a few books? I looked at Lin Shuyuan with pleading eyes. I heard that children in the womb can hear things. Since I have nothing to do, I could read to him. If the child has even a third of your talent, I'd be content, I said, admiring him. My child will definitely be like me, he replied, a flash of pride in his eyes. When he came that evening, he brought books. Besides the basic books for children like the 3-character classic and 1,000-character classic, there were also some travelogues. The travelogues are to help pass the time, he said casually. Then he looked at me with burning eyes, carrying me to the bed. It's almost 4 months now, I asked the doctor. The rest of his words were lost in the closeness of his lips. The next morning, I woke up to a warm bed. The maid, ignoring the marks on my body, quietly helped me dress and wash up. Just after finishing breakfast, my mother-in-law entered the room. Yenner, how do you feel today? I quickly got up and greeted her. Replying to Mother, I feel quite well. She said some more concerned words, and then sent in a variety of jewelry and silks. She also had someone bring in a bowl of medicine. The doctor said your health is fine, but this medicine is to help you regain your strength. It'll do you good, she said, her gaze full of expectation. I took the medicine, about to drink it, but before I could, Lin Shuyuan suddenly knocked the bowl over. Don't drink it. He shouted angrily at my mother-in-law. Did you want to harm this child?
8.
My mother-in-law's face changed, and she defended herself. Husband, how could you think that of me? I'm only doing this for the child's sake. Then tell me, what exactly is this medicine? Lin Shuyuan demanded. Her eyes shifted uneasily. It's just some tonic, it won't harm the body. Tonic. Lin Shuyuan snorted. Even now, you still refuse to admit it. He stopped looking at her and turned to me. Did you drink it? How much did you drink? I didn't drink any. You knocked it over before I could. I grabbed his sleeve desperately and asked, what kind of medicine is this? Will it hurt the child? His tone softened immediately. You didn't drink it, so don't worry. He patted the back of my hand reassuringly. I quickly pulled my hand back, realizing I had lost my composure. He gave me a deep look, then ordered, take her back and lock her up. My mother-in-law's face changed again. Lin Shuyuan, I am the Prime Minister's wife. You can't do this. Aren't you moving yet? At Lin Shuyuan's command, my mother-in-law was silenced and taken away. As I watched her struggle, I trembled and asked, what kind of medicine was it? Lin Shuyuan pulled me into his arms, speaking with relief. She had the doctor check your belly, and they thought it was a girl. So she went for a folk remedy. This medicine supposedly can turn a girl into a boy. Folk remedies aren't reliable. I've seen someone drink that kind of medicine and give birth to a monstrosity. I shuddered and buried myself deeper into his arms. Thank goodness you arrived in time. But my shudder wasn't from fear. It was excitement. The plan was going smoothly. It was time to begin the next step. 9. After my mother-in-law was confined to her quarters, Lin Shuyuan, under the pretext of being concerned about the child in my belly, generously sent numerous gifts to Songha court. He even began visiting openly during the day. As winter approached, snowflakes fell for several consecutive days. One day, Lin Shuyuan came in covered in snow just as I was sitting by the brazier, reading to the child in my belly. He frowned. Why isn't there any silver charcoal? Didn't I have some sent over? I quickly explained, the snow has been falling these past few days, so the charcoal has been used up faster, but the quality of the charcoal is still very good. Then I smiled and asked, it's cold outside. Let me warm up some soup for you. You should drink it to chase away the chill. My belly had grown quite large, and I was wearing a thin robe, which made it even more noticeable. Other parts of my body were becoming increasingly obvious as well. His breath grew heavier. He then whispered a few words in my ear. I blushed and extended my hand under the covers. After a long while, the fragrance of osmanthus flowers spread through the air. He took a deep breath, his voice hoarse. I'll have the steward give you the pairing boards tomorrow. I was startled and sat up. Is that appropriate? You're the young mistress while your mother-in-law is confined, so what's inappropriate about taking charge of the household? He casually twirled a strand of my hair with his finger. It will eventually be yours to manage, he added. I'll do as you say. I nestled into his arms, obedient as always. I secretly savored the title, young mistress, in my heart, wondering how wonderful it would be if it were mistress instead.
10.
The next day, the steward respectfully handed me the pairing boards and brought all the household staff to Songha Court. The atmosphere at the Prime Minister's residence had shifted. In no time, many people began to pledge their allegiance, both openly and covertly. I was somewhat anxious. Xu Yuan, I'm afraid I won't be able to manage well. Although I learned some household management from my family, my father was only a minor official. How can I compare to the Prime Minister's residence? Lin Shuyuan comforted me. There's plenty of time. Take it slow. Even if you don't know, it's fine. I'll make sure everything is arranged. Thank you. Without you, I wouldn't know what to do, I said gratefully, throwing myself into his arms. With Lin Shuyuan's support, everything went more smoothly. The steward handled everything, and I didn't need to do much. But no one dared to look down on me anymore. Except for the Prime Minister, everything started to focus on Songha Court first. However, things are never simple. It's either the east wind that prevails over the west wind, or the west wind prevails over the east wind. The confinement in the main courtyard caused my mother-in-law to gradually be neglected. At first, the meals were delayed. When it was discovered, only a light scolding was given, but the meals sent to her were even less thoughtful. Later, I heard that her blankets were damp, and no one even prepared fresh ones. On a cold winter night, she caught a cold and fell ill. When the steward reported it to me, I thought for a long time and decided to visit her in the main courtyard. When the mother-in-law fell ill, as a daughter-in-law, I should have at least gone to inquire about her health, even if I couldn't attend to her personally. When I arrived, she was throwing a tantrum. She was shouting at the maidservants, "You wretched servant! Are you trying to burn me to death?" The floor was scattered with broken medicine bowls, and the room was filled with the foul odor of medicine. "Mother, I heard you're ill. How are you feeling?" When she saw me, her eyes lit up. "Yunner, you're willing to come see me, so you've forgiven me, right?" She looked at me with hopeful eyes. "Please help me beg for mercy. I truly know I was wrong." It seemed like she had been going through a rough time recently. But what could I do? She would be even more miserable soon. I deliberately took a few steps closer. "Mother, But before I could finish, she interrupted me. She suddenly reached out and tore open my collar, revealing several red marks on my neck. They were from the night before, left by Lin Shuyuan in a moment of uncontrollable passion. "What's this?" 11. She looked furious. "Who did this?" I smiled at her and, in a voice only the two of us could hear, whispered, "Mother, who do you think did it? In this household, who could possibly hide anything from Shuyuan?" She widened her eyes in disbelief, her chest heaving with anger. Clearly, she was furious. "You wretched slut," she shouted furiously. Before she could continue her curses, I pretended to be frightened and ran out. I pushed open the study door, and Lin Shuyuan looked at me in surprise. "What's wrong? Why are you in such a rush?" I quickly explained, "I heard my mother-in-law was ill, so I went to visit her." but she saw the marks on my neck. What should I do? Shuyuan? Lin Shuyuan glanced at my neck. Although my collar hid most of it, if he got close enough, he could still see some marks. I looked up at him, helpless and vulnerable. In the next moment, the child in my belly moved fiercely, causing me to gasp in pain and bend over. My stomach hurts, I said with a trembling voice. He gazed at me deeply, remaining silent for a long time. My heart raced, and I was about to say something when he suddenly picked me up and placed me on the low couch in the study. I'll take care of it. He then had someone call for the doctor to check on me. Only after confirming that I was fine did he leave. He didn't say how he would handle the situation, but he told the servants that the lady needed to rest and that no one should disturb her. I had taken a lot of medicine, but my illness only seemed to worsen, just like my late husband's. I suppose it's the same kind of medicine? After my mother-in-law's serious illness, I held on to the power of managing the household, and my days became more comfortable. The entire house could see the relationship between me and Lin Shuyuan, but everyone remained silent. They only became more attentive toward me. Ah, power truly is a wonderful thing. After Lin Shuyuan went to his duties, I went to visit my mother-in-law, holding my belly, not caring about her resentful gaze. She was lying in bed, crying out in pain, unable to speak. When her mouth opened, I saw only a short piece of tongue left, and saliva uncontrollably flowed out. I looked at her with disdain and said, "How disgusting." She screamed more forcefully. Struggling to get up, but lacking strength, she fell back onto the bed. "Does this sound familiar?" I asked her. She froze and looked at me blankly. It was also a winter day, when Father hunted a fox and a few rabbits, and made their furs to sell in the city. Father said he would buy me sugar cakes with the money, and asked me to stay home obediently. But Father accidentally brushed against your dress while selling, and you exploded with rage. You said it was disgusting, and had someone break Father's leg. Thinking back to the sight of Father's bones and bloody, mangled legs still chills me to the core. I wrapped my cloak tightly around me and continued. Father fell sick that same day and passed away within 2 days. Mother went to report to the authorities, but as soon as she left the yamen, Lin abducted her. Lin tortured her for a day and a night, and only when Mother passed away was she dumped in a mass grave. Looking at her trembling with fear, I smiled. "It seems you can be scared too." I pulled the hairpin from my head and stabbed it into her, over and over again. She screamed in pain, trying to call for help, but could only make unintelligible sounds. When I was exhausted, I stopped. She lay there, on the verge of death. I endured the increasingly frequent pain in my abdomen, wiped the blood from the hairpin, and put it back in my hair. "Soon, you'll join Lin and in the underworld." Back at Songha Courtyard, Lin Shuyuan was sitting by the window reading. When I entered, he looked at me with an untroubled expression. "Where did you go?" I opened the box I was carrying to show him. "I went to the plum forest behind the main courtyard to collect some snow to make tea for you." His face softened. "You could have sent someone. Your belly's getting bigger. Be careful, the ground's slippery." "I just want to do something with my own hands for you. I heard you say the snow on the plum blossoms." I suddenly gasped, my face turning pale. "Shuyuan, my stomach hurts. I'm about to give birth." He shouted loudly, "Someone!" The midwife arrived quickly, bringing in basin after basin of blood. I was numb from the pain, following the midwife's instructions, pushing with all my strength. By the time night fell the next day, I heard the sound of a baby crying. I glanced at the wrinkled child in the swaddling blanket and fainted. When I woke up, Lin Shuyuan was holding the child, gently comforting him. When the baby fell asleep, Lin Shuyuan spoke in a hoarse voice, "I'll send you both out of the manor." I froze, tears welling up, and asked in a trembling voice, "Has someone discovered something?" He wiped my tears with a handkerchief. "Once I've arranged things, you and the child can come back. I want the child to openly call me father." My heart surged with joy, though my face remained obedient as always. "I'll do as you say." 3 months later, the young master of the Prime Minister's residence, Lin Shuyuan, was seriously injured by assassins during an inspection of the city outskirts. He was later saved by a peasant woman, who he was so grateful to that he married her with full official rights and brought her back to the Prime Minister's residence. Not long after the wedding, rumors spread that the new Prime Minister's wife was pregnant. "In a few months, we'll bring you heir back," Lin Shuyuan said with a smile. "I miss the child terribly, waiting day and night, unable to eat, losing much weight." This also made Lin Shuyuan more affectionate toward me. He trusted me more and more, and aside from the daily duties of the household, I also began to nurture some trusted aides. Fearing my past would be exposed, I refused to attend other ministers' family banquets. He merely said, "You're the Prime Minister's wife now. If you don't want to go, then don't." Soon, the day of my delivery arrived. I joyfully held Yue, who had learned to call me mother and father. Lin Shuyuan said, "I'll tell everyone that Yue is weak and shouldn't be seen by others. By the time he's 5 or 6, no one will notice anything different." I hesitated. "Then we won't have a full month celebration?" "Of course we will, as long as Yue doesn't meet anyone," Lin Shuyuan said nonchalantly. My heart pounded violently. Finally, this day had come.
16.
On the day of the full moon banquet, the Prime Minister's mansion was filled with guests. When the long-absent emperor appeared, the atmosphere of the banquet reached its peak. The former emperor's sudden death left behind an 8-year-old child. The current emperor had been diligent and studious in his youth, but later became obsessed with the Taoist faith. Even when attending court, he would often wear his Taoist robes in full view. The stage for the performance had been set, and it was my turn to step on stage. The wet nurse who had been looking after Yue was a person from Lin Xiaoyuan's side. When she saw me heading out, she quickly said, "Madam, please leave the young master to me." She kindly reminded me, "I once had the honor of meeting the emperor. The emperor values the prime minister and would never trouble you." I avoided her reaching hands and signaled the maid beside me. The maid took the wet nurse aside with a smile, saying, "Madam's business should not be discussed." But the wet nurse's words were cut off as she was tightly bound and taken away. I held the child and walked towards the front courtyard. Yue in my arms babbled unintelligibly. The sounds of the banquet grew louder. Drums, cheers, and conversations mixed together. I took a deep breath and walked steadily inside. Lin Xiaoyuan was the first to notice me. His pupils shrank in surprise, and he quickly walked up to me, sternly saying, "The emperor is here, go back." The emperor sat at the head of the table, seemingly indifferent. "Lord Lin, since the madam has come, why must you send her away?" Without looking sideways, I walked past Lin Xiaoyuan, knelt directly in front of the emperor, and said, "Liu Shiruoyun accuses Prime Minister Lin Xiaoyuan of poisoning his own child, harming his wife, and seizing his daughter-in-law. He also forced me to bear his illegitimate child. Lin Xiaoyuan has disregarded morality and committed heinous crimes." I lifted Lin Yu above my head. "This child is the proof. May your majesty decide." 17. Everyone was stunned into silence upon hearing my shocking words. Only Lin Yu cried loudly in fear. The air seemed to freeze. After a long pause, Lin Xiaoyuan broke the silence. "The child has been crying. Hand him over." He stretched out his hands to take the child. The crying gradually stopped, and Lin Yu whimpered, calling out, "Father." Anyone could tell this was not a child just 1 month old. People recalled the 3 funerals at the Prime Minister's mansion. It didn't take long for them to understand, and they looked at Lin Xiaoyuan in disbelief. The emperor seemed intrigued, watching the scene, and asked, "Lord Lin, do you have no explanation?" Lin Xiaoyuan remained calm, holding the child in the center of everyone's gaze. It seemed as though it wasn't he who had been exposed. He spoke loudly. "A month ago, the mighty general of the North returned to the capital to report. If you count the time, he should be arriving today, along with the 30,000 elite soldiers of the North. All the officials are present at today's banquet, and I've already sent word to the commander of the Imperial Guard. Soon, 50,000 guards will arrive. to punish the foolish monarch and usher in an era of prosperity. I was shocked. I quickly looked up at him, realizing why he insisted on holding this banquet. The emperor laughed loudly. Foolish monarch? With you, the treacherous prime minister, if I were not a fool, I would have probably been killed by you already, the emperor sneered. Outside, sounds of fighting began to reach our ears. The emperor listened intently and said, "Then let's wait calmly." After a long while, the commander of the Imperial Guard entered, his silver armor and long spear soaked in blood. He knelt before the emperor, his voice low. "I have not failed in my duty." Everything was over. I sighed in relief, feeling drained as I collapsed to the floor. I turned to look at Lin Xiaoyuan. He was still looking at me, holding Lin Yu, his dark eyes locked on me. His lips moved silently. He was saying, "Ryan, don't be afraid." Tears suddenly streamed down my face.
18.
Lin Xiaoyuan was thrown into the death cell. His limbs were shackled, his exposed skin covered in whip marks, and his prison clothes were soaked in blood. When he saw me, he said, "You're here," as if talking about something mundane. Looking at his calm demeanor, my blood boiled. The affection and reliance I once had for him vanished in my gaze. Every word I spoke was soaked in blood, filled with hatred. Just because she touched her dress, my father had his legs broken. The authorities wouldn't accept my mother's complaint. Lin and tortured my mother to death. Lin Xiaoyuan, all of this is because of you. Because you're the prime minister, they abused their power and did whatever they wanted. I hate them. I hate you. I hate how you make me feel disgusted every time you touch me. He remained silent, looking at me calmly. When I finished, he sighed, "Your revenge has been fulfilled. Shouldn't you be happy? Why are you still so angry?" I froze. He laughed softly. "Do you want to see me cry and beg for mercy?" "I won't." His voice was quiet, as if speaking to me, or perhaps to himself. "Success means I'm high and mighty, owning everything. If I fail, I'll be torn apart. That's all." With that, he crossed his legs and closed his eyes, no longer looking at me. My fury seemed to be released all at once. I stood frozen in place, unable to react. It wasn't until the jailer came to remind me. As I left, I looked back. Lin Xiaoyuan was hidden in the dim prison, like he was about to be swallowed by the darkness. 19. I was taken to see Lin Yu. He lay on the bed, seemingly asleep. I checked his breath. There was nothing. I found my fingers trembling as I touched Lin Yu's face, which was cold to the touch. "You're—" I whispered his name, pushing him with all my strength, but he remained still. My heart felt as if it was being tightly squeezed, aching to the point I couldn't breathe. Tears poured out, falling one by one onto his face. I had lost the last of my blood relatives in this world. I staggered to the table. There were 2 cups of wine on the table. One was empty, and the other was left for me. I drank it all at once. I didn't know what poison the emperor had given, but it didn't hurt. Instead, my body felt light. I held Lin Yu tightly in my arms, quietly waiting for death to come. Lin Xiaoyuan's side story. When did I realize she had a problem? Probably from the first time I saw her. She stood there all alone, drenched, looking just like Yenna. It was too much of a coincidence. And I don't believe in coincidences. It was like years ago, when Zhao Ju claimed it was a coincidence that he caught Yenner in a private affair. Maybe because I had drunk, I followed her lead, and we spent a night together. The next day, when I found out her identity, I was indeed surprised, but what did that matter? The Zhao family had long fallen, and I was no longer the poor scholar I once was. In this household, even if I discovered the truth, what could be done? I just never expected her to actually be connected to Yenner. The person I sent to investigate reported that Lu Cheng indeed had a daughter named Lu Ruoyun, but she had eloped with an actor. The Lu family, embarrassed, kept the news covered up. Now, the Lu Ruoyun in front of me was a child found by a hunter couple in the market. Yenner had once said she had a younger sister who went missing when she was little. The age, location, and season all matched, and she resembled Yenner too much. from her appearance and expression to the occasional unconscious gestures. When she was coldly treated by Linen, the redness and swelling in her eyes were identical to when Yennefer was demoted from wife to concubine. Her trembling figure, when scolded by Zhao Ju, resembled Yennefer, hiding in the firewood room, secretly crying. The helplessness and despair in their eyes were the same. Zhao Ju even forced her to sleep with Linen. I could no longer contain my fury. Years ago, I failed to protect Yennefer, but now I would protect her. I pretended not to notice her oddities, indulging in a hidden pleasure. Gradually, I couldn't tell her apart from Yennefer, and I didn't want to. It wasn't until Zhao Ju, encouraged by others, offered her a remedy that I snapped out of it. It turned out that the whole thing was a trap set by the Emperor and her. But I had already fallen into the scheme, biting the bait. It was done. I gave her control of the household, letting her torment Zhao Ju. When she exposed the truth to Zhao Ju, I was only angry that she used her body as a pawn. When she went to see Zhao Ju, I stood outside the door. I heard her blood-curdling accusations, and my face turned pale. I realized that whether it was Yennefer or Yennefer, perhaps I was destined to lose them both. But I wanted to gamble. I wanted to believe that maybe she still had some feelings for Yennefer, and for me. But when she appeared at the full moon banquet, I knew I had lost the bet. The Emperor's carriage is here. Go back. I scolded her harshly. Go back. I silently pleaded in my heart, but she ignored me, kneeling directly before the Emperor. That kneel made me realize that everything was over. While everyone awaited the final result, I already knew. The late Emperor entrusted me with the power of the court, placing both the Emperor and the Empire in my hands. Naturally, I had to live up to that trust. The mighty general of the Northern Territories had long harbored rebellious thoughts, and I merely facilitated a play. When the Emperor came to see me, his expression was complicated. The commander of the Imperial Guard has confessed everything. I smiled as I looked at this Emperor. He was a child I had watched grow up. You've done well this time. The late Emperor would be at ease, I said. It wasn't an intricate plan, but it was a well-calculated move, securing the people's hearts. By suppressing the rebellion and eliminating the power-hungry officials, his throne was solidified. Do you have any remaining wishes? I can fulfill them, but you must die, the Emperor said. I thought for a moment and replied, No, Your Majesty. He looked at me deeply before leaving one last line. I made them drink for 3 days. The 3-day intoxication was a palace secret drug. After drinking it, a person's breath would cease, but they would awaken 3 days later. I let out a sigh of relief. I knew that her and Yennefer's lives were safe, but I could no longer take care of them. I wondered if she would be scared. Would Yennefer cry? I closed my eyes and whispered prayers, hoping they would be safe and happy from now on.
The end.